Hey, everybody. Welcome back to In Broad Daylight, a solo podcast hosted by me. I'm Adam Todd Brown, and I am here today with an action-packed update to a story I talked about right around the same time last month. That would be the highly controversial martial law declaration by President
Yoon Suk-yeol
of South Korea that sent that country into a political tailspin that they have yet to recover from. To refresh your memory, you could just be a bro and go watch the first video and or listen to the first episode about martial law in South Korea again. But barring that, please enjoy the following summary. In 2019, President Yoon was still just newly appointed Prosecutor General Yoon, a darling of the Democratic Party, who were the ruling party at the time. Yoon fell out of favor with the Dems when he opened an investigation into the country's liberal Minister of Justice, prompting the Democrats to open a bunch of not at all punitive or retaliatory investigations into Yoon and his family. He responded to that noise by successfully running for president in 2022, winning by the slimmest of margins, 0.07%, in an election featuring two candidates voters hated so much, they took to calling it the Squid Game election. Yoon has been dogged by a bunch of scandals of his own, but they pale in comparison to the heat his administration has gotten over the antics of his wife,
Kim Kon-hee.
She's been tied to everything from plagiarism to lying about her education history and even manipulating stock prices. But somehow, it was her getting caught on video accepting an alleged bribe in the form of a $2,200 Christian Dior handbag that marked the beginning of the probable end for the Yoon administration. The president waited way too long to address that scandal and did a terrible job of addressing it when he finally did. And his party eventually paid the price when the opposition won a majority in 2024 parliamentary elections. With that, they started demanding the First Lady be prosecuted for her misdeeds. They also tried to impeach 3 of Yoon's top prosecutors, but they apparently took things a step too far when the opposition majority voted to cut almost $3 billion from Yoon's 2025 budget. Shortly after that, Yoon issued his now infamous martial law declaration, and all hell broke loose. The order was lifted after 6 hours and a parliament building standoff that produced some truly stunning images of lawmakers grabbing soldiers' guns and things of the like. When we last checked in, a coalition of 6 opposition parties all filed impeachment motions and had designs on voting on them within days. Before they could do that, Yoon's defense minister stepped up to take responsibility for the martial law orders and resigned from his job, likely hoping the loss of livelihood would be seen as sufficient punishment by the colleagues he probably would have told the military to shoot if that martial law order went a little different. They did not see it that way at all. Instead, Defense Minister Kim was arrested on December 8th on charges of insurrection and abuse of power, and because these things seemingly move way faster in South Korea, his trial is already underway. His defense, which will eventually be President Yoon's defense as well, is that the prosecution and the judicial branch don't have the authority to make judgments about the president's constitutional ability to declare martial law. In response, the prosecution pointed to a 2018 Supreme Court ruling that determined that martial law declarations can be subject to judicial review. That trial started the day I wrote this, so there aren't too many developments outside of those opening claims by each side. There was better news for President Yoon, though. Remember I mentioned that 6 opposing parties all launched impeachment motions after the martial law order, yeah? Well, those motions were lifted after Yoon's People Power Party rallied around him and boycotted the vote. That meant there weren't enough people voting to reach the 2/3 majority required for impeachment to happen. So now, just brimming with confidence, Yoon decided to take to the airwaves on December 12th and address the nation, claiming that his, quote, exercising of the president's right to declare martial law was an act of rule that is not subject to judicial review, as with acts of pardoning or diplomatic powers, end quote. He also added that the, quote, National Assembly, which is controlled by a massive opposition party, is no longer the bedrock of liberal democracy, but has become a monster that is destroying the constitutional order of liberal democracy. This is a paralysis of state function. And what is that if not a national crisis? End quote. And you know what? That made people feel a lot better. Just joking. The opposition party called his televised speech an incitement to insurrection and called for his immediate arrest. Here's a quote from a representative of the Rebuilding Korea Party. There is no reason to hesitate over an emergency arrest. Yoon needs to be arrested today. We need to have an impeachment vote as soon as possible. We must vote at the earliest possible time and take command over the armed forces out of a madman's hands. End quote. A few short days later, President Yoon was impeached after a vote by the National Assembly. He was suspended pending an impeachment trial, which is also underway now, and incumbent Prime Minister Han took over as acting president. And I'm sure he will have a lengthy and successful run in office. The day after the impeachment vote, Yoon was hit with a summons from prosecutors to appear for questioning, and he vehemently ignored that summons. When prosecutors handed his case over to the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials, he ignored them too. In the midst of all this, acting President Han was asked to approve 2 bills that would have appointed special counsels to investigate President Yoon and First Lady Kim both. He refused, and you will not believe what happened next. They impeached him too. Who knows if South Korea even has a president right now? Maybe they're just going to go without one until they see how this all shakes out. Whatever the case, after that, prosecutors sent Yoon one last summons to ignore, and ignore it he did. So on December 31st, the court issued a detention warrant for President Yoon. And hey, how hard can arresting a former president who's still kind of the sitting president really be? Very hard, as it turns out. That has a lot to do with a decision Yoon made early in his presidency. Back in 2022, he became the first leader in South Korea's modern history to not move into the official presidential residence, a building called the Blue House, even though it's just the roof that's blue. His thinking was that the building was a symbol of imperial power, and instead of being the place where the president lives, it should just be a thing that's open to the public. You know, like FBI headquarters will be in this country someday sooner than later, probably. People didn't love that choice on Yoon's part, by the way, especially when you take into account that setting up his new residence cost around $40 million. Why so spendy? Because instead of the Blue House, Yoon moved to the compound-esque former foreign minister's residence and immediately took to fortifying it with all sorts of intense security measures. The home sits on top of a hill in a neighborhood that's sometimes called Korea's Beverly Hills. BTS lives there. Some of them, anyway. Probably the ones who aren't in the military right now trying to arrest the president. How bittersweet would that be? On the one hand, it's a bummer you're getting arrested. But on the other hand, oh my God, is that rap monster? Since Yoon moved in, the new presidential residence is now surrounded by barbed wire fences, has several security checkpoints, and rows of buses in front that act as a security barrier. Local media and opposition parties both took to calling it an impregnable fortress. It's so impregnable, in fact, that the first time authorities showed up to arrest Yoon, they couldn't even get inside. They did make it past a lot of the security measures, but then were met with a 200-strong team of Yoon's security, the Presidential Security Service, who eventually turned authorities away after an hours-long standoff. Meanwhile, things were so secure inside the walls of that compound, a YouTuber managed to capture video of First Lady Kim walking one of the family's dogs on the grounds as authorities were trying to get in. Things were a little less secure in the areas surrounding the presidential residence, though. In addition to the security measures that make the place so hard to get into, thousands of Yoon supporters gathered beginning a week or so before the attempted arrest in the hopes of preventing an arrest from happening. His supporters see Yoon as the last line of defense between the country they love and communist North Korea followers who they claim have infested every walk of life, from the courts to the schools to the media. Here's a quote from a Yoon supporter speaking to the New York Times. "When I leave home for this rally every day, I tell my wife that this may be the last time she sees me alive, because I am ready to die for my cause. This is not just about protecting President Yoon. It's about saving my country for my descendants." End quote. Why is this all starting to sound so familiar? Can't put my finger on it. Whatever the case, his supporters say it's the other side that is trying to pull an insurrection, and in their eyes, that parliamentary majority that the opposition party gained in the last election is invalid. Can you guess why? Go ahead and say it with me. Because the election was rigged. If that sounds familiar, so will the slogan pro-Yoon supporters have taken to chanting lately. Stop the steal. Stop the steal. This particularly rabid subset of Yoon supporters call themselves the National Flag Brigade, but, in Korean. That's on account of how they carry both South Korean and American flags during their protests to show their support for how much President Yoon loves the United States. They even wear red hats and, according to a recent study, get most of their news from right-wing YouTubers. Other countries, they are like us. Authorities apologized to the public and said they were heartbroken over their failure to arrest Yoon. They also asked if they could give it another shot, and the court extended the warrant for Yoon's detention, which was set to expire a few days after that first detention attempt. Things really started falling apart for the president when the head of the Presidential Security Service, the same team that fought off Yoon's would-be arresters on January 3rd, abruptly resigned a week later on January 10th. Not only is the Presidential Security Service the outfit that halted the first arrest attempt, they are also the force that tried to get inside the National Assembly to stop the martial law vote. In the days after the martial law debacle, they rejected police attempts to serve a warrant related to cabinet meetings that preceded the martial law declaration. They've had Yoon's back this whole time. So the chief bodyguard resigning was a pretty ominous sign. And sure enough, on Wednesday, January 15th, the rest of the Presidential Security Service stepped aside and allowed Yoon to enter the record books by becoming the first sitting president to be arrested in South Korean history, just one day after his impeachment trial started, no less. And that's where we are now. The trials of impeached President Yoon and former Defense Minister Kim are underway, and we'll see where it goes from here. If there are further interesting developments, I'll share them with you, baby. Until then, that's our episode. Thank you so much for listening or watching, however you decided to do it. And goodbye, everybody. I love you.